Hey, welcome to another Journey on My Mind short. Dave and I are still trying to figure out what happened to our friends.
I know. And we're still wearing the same clothes.
I could have took my sweatshirt off.
Yeah.
That would have thrown people
There would
though.
have been a costume change.
Yeah, costume change in between. But we're still navigating this idea of uncertainty. We're still because it's so universal. It happens regularly. And if we're not somehow equipped in the midst of uncertainty, it gets difficult.
Yeah.
We fall into coping mechanisms and we do things we probably shouldn't. But so let's talk about what hope looks like in the midst of that. And I started last time. I'll let you kind of dive into the topic this time, and we'll go from there.
Well, I'm not dodging you, but really what I wanted to do is ask you honest questions.
Sure.
From a faith.
Feel free to dodge me though.
Yeah. Because I think this is maybe where the rubber meets the road with hope.
Uh-huh.
As you see it,
Mm-hmm.
what are we hopeful for or about from a faith standpoint? In other words, if we're like, we need to be hopeful during difficult times or uncertain times, we need to have hope in God.
Mm-hmm.
Are we hopeful for an outcome? Are we hopeful for, like, what are we talking about in your view?
I think the thing that is most confused with hope is wishful thinking.
Okay.
I hope that things get better. Mm-hmm. I hope that, or I wish upon a star, or, and we confuse hope and wishing. And wishing is leaning into the idea that I just wish things would get better. Mm-hmm. Hope stays in the moment, doesn't wish away what is, but finds good in it. And finds good while we're in the process of uncertainty or difficulty, or in those moments in life where, this year for me has been a year of it feels like this happens to me a lot, but death, people dying, right?
Yeah.
And so there is a sense of where, how does one navigate those moments of end of life? Both my mother-in-law died. My mother has recently died.
Yeah.
People around me, I've seen some death around me. Mm-hmm. And so in the midst of those moments when you're leading up to uncertainty, like, I don't know if they're going to make it. I don't know what this looks like. I can wishfully just kind of think or hope, or even have an expectation of God will resolve this in a positive way. Mm-hmm. That's wishful thinking. Okay. Hope sits in the moment and understands the uncertainty of the future, but finds its center, finds its place in being in the presence of people and with God in such a way that it allows for whatever the outcome to be. It doesn't dash the future that is to come. Mm-hmm. And hope is often just missed in the midst of difficulty and uncertainty. Mm-hmm. It's more wishful thinking is what we resort to. We just wish it would be different.
Right.
When hope embraces what is and has an expectation that God will do something good with it.
So let's take the theme that you picked up on, which is someone dying.
Yeah.
Getting sick and dying.
Okay.
So someone has a loved one.
Yeah.
A spouse.
Yeah.
A child. Whatever.
Yeah.
And gets a illness or cancer. Mm-hmm. And it's looking rough.
Yeah. And a lot of uncertainty in that.
We've been in Christian circles enough to know that people talk in hope terms. You need to have hope in God.
Right.
But we also know that plenty of very, very good people die.
Yeah.
And plenty of
everyone does.
Yeah. And plenty of people that are all prayed up die early or die
for sure.
Right. I mean, one of the guys I think is one of the best humans I've ever met died this past year.
Yeah.
He's fairly young.
Yeah.
So what are we telling people in that and is that the right thing is it a languaging issue? Is it a
hmm
is it a
I think it is.
okay?
I think it has something to do with what we understand hope to be.
Okay.
Um, Being hopeful in the midst of difficulty or uncertainty it looks like peace. It
Mm-hmm.
it it is this place where you've decided that your expectations of the outcome are undetermined and unknown.
Mm-hmm.
But yet in me is this settled understanding that it's not mine to know, but it is for me to be in the midst of this with God, with others, in such a way that I bring a presence of settledness in the midst of all that.
Mm-hmm.
Hope does that. That's what hope does for us.
It feels like this is super important because if you don't have a good idea of this, when the tough time comes
Mm-hmm.
and the outcome isn't what you wanted,
Right.
it's gonna
Right.
throw you into
Right.
a really bad place.
Yeah, I had good friends. Is awful. Their child ended up dying.
Mm-hmm.
And the question was, did God not hear me? Did
Mm-hmm.
God not hear my prayers?
Right.
Was God not present? Was he not? And the answer to the question is yes, he heard your prayers, and
Mm-hmm.
yes, he was with you, and yes, he was with your child as the
Mm-hmm.
child passed. All those things are true. But confusing hope with wishing
Mm-hmm.
will lead you to the expectation that God will do what I expect so that I don't experience pain or I don't experience something that isn't supposed to happen in a particular way.
Right.
That isn't the promise. The promise is I'll hear you.
Mm-hmm.
The promise is, and I will answer in the right way or the way that you want me to.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, then God is reduced to a genie. God is reduced to, I have this wish. You have to grant it because I rubbed the bottle, you came out, and now you gave me 3 wishes, and my wish is that you heal my child.
Yeah.
It doesn't work that way. And so something in us has to be able, I hope in the Lord means it's possible. The possibility exists that he will heal him because he can. But at the same time, there's a possibility he won't. And so the hope is in the person of God, the heart of God, and it's in a relationship with God. It isn't in the outcome of the circumstance or what is about to happen.
But it sure seems like anybody who goes through something like that, where they've lost
Mm-hmm.
the person that they love the most,
For sure.
I mean, it would be incredibly hard not to get to a place of resentment,
Uh-huh.
doubt to the point of, is any of this true?
Right. Oh, yeah.
And that seems like,
It's a faith killer.
yeah, it's a faith killer,
Yeah.
potentially,
Yeah.
because that feels like the culture that the Christian culture that we've grown up in, is that faith equals this
Yeah. If
kind
God,
of outcome.
if God really loved me,
Mhm.
you know, I've sat across the table from people, sat in the same room, sat in a hospital room.
Yeah.
If God really loved me, he'll do this. And he'll heal my kid. He'll heal my mother. He'll heal my spouse. He'll heal me. If he really loved me, he'll do that. And the answer to that question is he really loves you.
Mhm.
He's not obligated to do any of that. And somewhere in that is this missing the point of being in relationship with God. I
Yeah.
think it kind of goes back to how we understand who Jesus is. As people of the Christian faith, we look at the life of Jesus, and his life wasn't one of great privilege. he was born into an uncertain circumstance. He had to flee to Egypt. He was a carpenter's son. He didn't come from wealth. He didn't come from certainty at all.
Yeah.
As far as we know, his earthly father, Joseph, died when he was young, and so he's kind of the head of the house, and there's a whole lot of just uncertainty in Jesus's life. And then he chooses a life of nomadic, walking around and being supported by others, and being sought, and people trying to kill him, and ultimately is beaten and crucified. This is God in the flesh, right? And this is the God we've chosen, you and I have chosen to follow. And so it would seem to follow that part of our life is to emulate his, and we should expect that there's going to be some hardship. We should expect that there's going to be some persecution. We should expect those things, but we have been taught otherwise, that's not really the faith that we've been embraced by. A faith that says you should have a life that doesn't have hardship is not really faith at all. It is not realistic. It is not really even the life that we saw that the Savior lived. And can we pray to that end? Sure. But faith walking is saying, even in the times when it's really hard, he's with me.
Yeah.
And my hope's in that.
So last time we talked about how psychology and faith are not incompatible, and that some of the things we learn in psychology and that the research finds to be true are very much what we've known in the Christian faith to be true.
Yeah.
Practicing the presence of God, prayer, those kinds of things, or journaling, are all spiritual practices that are aligned with psychology and vice versa.
Oh, for sure.
So here's my contribution for today.
Right? Okay.
It is. And there are two concepts in psychology that I think are super important.
Okay.
And they're both non-words.
Okay.
So the first is non-attachment.
Non-attachment.
And the second is non-striving.
Oh, see, the second one's a little tougher.
All right. So I'm going to make the case.
Okay.
And again, the idea is that these are ideas that are psychological ideas. They're studied psychologically. They find them to be beneficial to people in terms of their emotional health.
Yeah. Okay.
And we would also, as people of faith, say also helpful in spiritual health.
Okay.
And non-attachment doesn't mean not being attached to another person. It doesn't mean being, unattached to your spouse or your kids, or, that's not what it means. It means becoming non-attached to anything that you don't have control over, that is impermanent, that can be taken away from you.
Okay.
And what the finding is, which is obvious, but we don't do it, is any of those things that are impermanent, that can be taken away, that we don't have control over, the more we become attached to those things, the more we will suffer.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And so
it's like when you have to put your dog down.
Right.
Yeah.
It's exactly.
Yeah.
So it doesn't mean you don't love your dog. It doesn't mean but if you're attached to a certain outcome, or a certain way of the world being,
right,
that doesn't align with how reality is,
right,
then you're going to suffer.
Yeah.
Now, to use the example of the dog, we're not talking about not being sad.
Right.
Like, non-attachment isn't about, this is a way to not be sad.
No.
It's more about how can you be sad and not suffer, not be stuck in it, not be pulled down into the pit from it.
Right.
That's what we're talking about.
Right.
And that's a big distinction, because sometimes people make the mistake of thinking that the goal is to not have a feeling.
Right.
Right. The goal is to not feel sad.
Right.
The goal is to not feel angry or frustrated. That's not the goal.
No.
The goal is to not be attached in a way that when you lose the thing,
right,
whether it's a possession or a job or a circumstance,
right,
that if you lose it, that you're not destroyed by it.
Is it slipping into despair then, or something? Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
The other is similar, and it's called non-striving. And that is that a lot of our life is spent really trying to grab hold of things that, again, once we do that, we actually do worse. And here's an interesting little sidebar. When psychologists study performing artists or athletes who are performing artists, or performing athletes, the more they rate high on striving, the worse their performance is.
Wow.
And the better that they are at non-striving.
Yeah.
Now, that doesn't mean they don't practice.
Right.
It doesn't mean they don't try. It doesn't mean they don't work hard.
Yeah.
It just means that they're not grabbing so hard that it gets them all gummed up in their head.
Right.
And that's a similar idea here.
Yeah.
The mental picture I always have is, if you had to, like, let's say you gave your dog a bath. We'll go back to the dog.
Okay.
And you have a big tub, and then you have bar soap, and you drop the soap and you're trying to get it. The more you kind of grab after that, right, the more
it slips
shoots away from you. In fact, it goes further away, the more you kind of grab hard at it.
Right.
And you have to kind of sneak up on it and gently hold it. Right.
Yeah.
That's non-striving. And so for me, these two concepts are really, they're interlocking, but they're really helpful in how do we think about times of uncertainty in a way that lets us be hopeful, but not deluded, or not just
Right.
burying our head in the sand, or not just
Mm-hmm.
giving way to despair.
Right. Because there's a point in these experiences, and I think your sports analogy is great.
Yeah.
Because you can see when an athlete who's a great athlete doesn't perform up to expectations, and they try harder and harder and harder, and it gets worse and worse and worse because they're expending energy in ways that is not helpful.
Right.
It's actually, now they're stuck with, they're overanalyzing, they're doing all kinds of things. And that is the essence of trying to, there's no understanding of what comes next. I don't know what to do now.
Right.
Right.
A while ago, Mike in a sermon used the term non-anxious presence, which I like.
Yeah.
And so the part of this is non-anxious presence, but I'd even extend that a little further and just say non-anxious mindset, or non-anxious sort of
Right.
a way of being in the moment in this time where I'm not so wrapped around the axle about
Yep.
losing this thing, or the outcome being a certain way,
Right.
or
Yeah.
having to try to control all these things that I can't possibly control.
Yeah.
And man, that brings us to a much better place,
Right.
psychologically and spiritually.
Yeah. A lot of people that I've counseled through marriage issues, there was unrealistic expectations of what that marriage was going to be.
100%. Yeah, that's got to be the killer.
And that is what we're talking about. There is this, I have now come to the conclusion what this is going to look like a year from now. And if it doesn't, what do we do? Like, and the hope isn't in the relationship then, it's in the expectation. It is got to come out this way.
Well, to use marriage as the example, non-attachment in that doesn't mean you're not attached to your spouse or not committed
Right.
to your marriage.
Right.
But what you realize is I'm really attached to my spouse behaving these ways.
Yeah, right.
Or being this way. Or
Right.
us doing these things, or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
And some of them might be okay and good things.
Yeah.
But the more we're sort of like having these expectations that go unmet, that we're then getting
Right.
really stuck on,
Yeah.
we're just going to suffer.
Yep. Yeah, if you could only read my mind. All right. Well, thanks, Dave. That was a good, hopefully hopeful conversation for people in uncertainty. Thanks. Have a great day.
See ya.